Gudian. Hello and welcome wherever you have travelled from. My name is Michelle Locke and I am a Darug woman. I'm connected through my maternal grandmother to the Burruburungu clan, the kangaroo people of Darug country. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing wisdom, strength and love of the ancestors, elders of the Barramadical lands where we come together today. Specifically, I acknowledge and offer my respect to Auntie Erasme Pryor, I know she's hiding there somewhere, who's joining us today and is a member of the Western Sydney University Elders Advisory Committee. I offer my respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people. To everyone here attending, or for those viewing this lecture, I offer my respect to you, your elders and ancestors. In writing this Welcome to Country, I have spent some time thinking about this year's NAIDOC theme, Keep the Fire Burning, Black, Loud and Proud. And in thinking about it, I've travelled down a number of paths in my mind. On one such thought journey, I considered the intention of keeping the fire burning, and on another, I thought about how my interpretation of what it is to be black, loud and proud. For myself, Black, Loud and Proud speaks of my responsibility and desire to honour and respectfully represent my Darug ancestors, elders, family and community. Although I think it's probably important to say that it's unlikely that for me being loud and proud doesn't necessarily mean you'll see me shouting or openly boasting about myself. If we look to country and think on natural formations like the Three Sisters in Katoomba or Uluru in the Northern Territory, we can envision them standing proud on the landscape. And their silence speaks volumes in spirit and presence. Like these formations, to me being loud and proud is about being present. At times, I might need to raise my voice to bring attention to those who have or are paving a way for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. At other times, my presence may be expressed through reciprocal conversations or in quiet contemplation as I do my best to listen deeply. I am in awe of the power of silence, but not the type of silence that comes from feeling invisible or unheard. I'm speaking of the comfort you feel when many people stand together in silent contemplation and respect for a loved one who's travelled back to Sky Country, or the strength that is built and felt when we stand together in silent protest, in which our shared thoughts, feelings and intentions are almost palatable and deafening. These thoughts I've also applied to the idea of keeping the fire burning. At times, like raising our voices, the fire is built high and burns hot, with the embers that proudly pop and draw attention to themselves. Then there are the times when the fire burns low, like cool burning that walks over country, rejuvenating and healing the land. And of course, there's the fireplace, where you can become mesmerised by the embers that ebb and glow and the tiny flames that come and go. This fire represents that quiet contemplation where some of us need to take a minute to listen, to think and to heal, while others walk together, gathering the fuel required to keep that fire burning. At different times in our lives, we'll be part of that roaring fire that draws attention and creates significant change. And then we'll also become the glowing embers that hold experiences and knowledge that will be shared with the next generation who come to rekindle and build that fire up again. These thoughts that I'm sharing with you are just one way of thinking about this year's NAIDOC theme. And you might or might not agree with the way that I've interpreted this, but that is truly the beauty of Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing. There's always more than one answer or approach. When we share our differing experiences and perspectives, we can only grow and strengthen one another, like adding more fuel to the fire. More voices to the conversation can bring more warmth, comfort, strength and healing to more people. So, in recognition of standing black, loud and proud together, I finish this welcome by offering my gratitude in saying, Dijurigora, Yana Janui Bubuwu Ingami. Thank you, for walking with me and strengthening my spirit. So you're stuck with me for a little bit longer, and we can get on to the event of why we're here, and hopefully I've set a good scene and a good theme. So first of all, everybody again, thank you for joining us for the 26th Yarramundi Lecture. This annual event, which was established by Auntie Pearl Waimara in 1997, has interwoven itself as a centrepiece of Western Sydney University's commitment to reconciliation. It has acted as a forum of local and national importance for Indigenous communities. This year's NAIDOC theme, as I mentioned already, is Keep the Fire Burning, Black, Loud and Proud. We'll explore this theme within the broader context of the contributions of our special guest speakers today. But before that, it is my pleasure to introduce our interim Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Claire Pollock, to deliver the university welcome. Please welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. In case you didn't know who I was, I cleverly wore the same jacket. That was not deliberate, but I thought, oh, that was very clever, very clever. In talking to you this morning, I, of course, start by thanking Michelle for her wonderful welcome to country. Your welcomes are always heartfelt, and they teach me something every time. And as a teacher, that is something I know you could do nothing more than teach in every day of your life. And you do that every time you do a welcome to country. On behalf of the university, of course, I stand here and acknowledge that today we are meeting on the lands of the Barmadigal people of the Darug Nation. I acknowledge their ancestors who have been the traditional custodians of this country for tens of thousands of years. I pay my respects to those elders, past and present, and also extend that, my personal respect, to all members of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and First Nations communities who are here today. I also want to thank and acknowledge Professor Michelle Trudgett for the invitation to speak this morning, but also for your ongoing leadership of the Indigenous community here at Western, but also the great work that we do. But on behalf of the university, I am very pleased to say Werrimi on behalf of the university and welcome to the 2024 Yarramundi Lecture. Of course, as Michelle mentioned, this is the 26th anniversary of this annual lecture that brings us all together with the broader public, to engage on matters affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This year, of course, we're holding this in NAIDOC Week. And that theme, Keep the Fire Burning, Black, Loud and Proud, I know in terms of the events that we've had this week and those that we will have the rest of the week, not least the gala dinner on Friday, a great moment to celebrate and feel pride in our achievements of what the community and what the university is able to do. Not least, as I said, the Yarramundi Lecture, 26th year of the Yarramundi Lecture. This university as an institution has only existed for 35 years. So this is one of the longest running features of this university's history. That, of course, when you talk about years of history, that is just a pinpoint of time in the amount of history and the duration of the engagement of our traditional owners on the land, on all the lands where we operate. But as I said, today it's my great pleasure to represent and say on behalf of the university how proud we are to host this great event. And we acknowledge that we benefit from the Indigenous community incredibly. We could not be here without your guidance and without the knowledge that First Nations people have kindly shared with us, and also to take responsibility and acknowledge our responsibility to reciprocate in a genuine manner that serves the community. We recognise the wisdom and contributions of Indigenous peoples and that is paramount to our success. And we strive to foster an environment of safety, value, and respect for all. I mentioned that this year marks the 35th anniversary of the university. Of course, it started as University of Western Sydney and grew into Western Sydney University with a name change in 2015. And the success and growth of the university over the 35 years is underpinned by the commitment and efforts of the staff and the broader university community. And whilst we've been reflecting this year on the achievements over 35 years, there's been some incredibly notable achievements about the success in Indigenous excellence. I'll mention a few of those. You know those almost better than I do, but for me, the things like the establishment, the existence and establishment of such a strong Indigenous professoriate group is really noteworthy. It is something that you are right to be proud of that this university has, and very few universities can match that, both in size and quality and impact on the national scale. Of course, the successful role of Badanami in supporting our Indigenous students, and the fact that we have those presence across 7 campuses. Our Indigenous Ignite traineeship program that helps people get paid, Indigenous people get paid experience in university, give them a start, give them opportunity that can lead and has led to ongoing employment. Of course, we're extraordinarily proud of the fact that through particularly the work of Michelle Trudgett and the teams here at the university, we're able to secure funding from the New South Wales Government for the Indigenous Centre of Excellence, and you'll hear a lot more about that today. But we also, and you would have seen the, somewhere, I think they're out the back, the Yarning Circle. This is one of these publications which I know is worked on really hard, but it has great impact across the community, not just the university community, but in terms of telling both the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous community, celebrating the work that we do, that gentle reminder every quarter, here we are, here we are, here we are, look at what we're doing. Look at how well we do what we do. It's a great piece of work that is so important to represent the great work that you all do, but also to connect more broadly across the whole community. And also, I think if you look around, and for those of you that don't normally come to this campus, but if you go onto any of our campuses, for any of you that are not part of the university community, to see now the commitment that at our entry signs, we have Indigenous signage. The fact that we've got on sites of placemaking, Indigenous placemaking, such as in Kingswood and the First People's Walk, and the great work that I've seen in the development of the work down in Campbelltown, and that again is recognising and celebrating that these are places first of all for Indigenous people. We couldn't do any of this, of course, without great people. I will, before I go on to say any more, and Michelle's going to speak next, acknowledge the incredible leadership of Professor Michelle Trudgett. You know her well. You know the work that she does within this university. She's also a national leader, recognised as such, and the work that she does nationally is significant at any time, but this time probably even more so than ever. I know that you will hear shortly from Michelle and others about the Indigenous Centre of Excellence. I'm going to save that a little bit, but it is going to be the most significant building on any campus of any university in Australia in certainly the last 30 years, celebrating Indigenous culture and Indigenous language and Indigenous peoples and communities. It is an extraordinary piece. Many of you will know that I unfortunately won't be here at this university to see the development of this. I will be leaving Western in a few weeks' time to head way west, way back west, back on to Wajak Budja, where I spent many years over in Perth. But I will look from there with great admiration, and you'd better invite me back for the opening, Michelle. It is going to be groundbreaking, not only as a building, but also as a place and as a way of being. And we need to work out what that will be. You need to work out what that will be and how we operate and how we do something significant and different in this country for Indigenous people. We have, as you all know, our Indigenous strategies, our future decadal strategies, our research strategies. We've got our strategies about our people. All these show where we are going to go over the next few years. But none of these work, none of these strategies do anything unless they are populated and lived and breathed by you in this room and those outside this room too. So as we listen to the speakers today, I ask you to consider what we can do even more. Sorry, Michelle. Sorry, team, who will then... What more can we do? But not only, Michelle, I'm talking about the whole university community. What more can we as a community do to integrate Indigenous perspectives? How can we respect knowledge in our own work, in our studies and in our engagement? Reflect on that, and maybe that's the promise that we all need to make to ourselves in this NAIDOC week, is how do we do even better by our Indigenous communities? I'm speaking as a non-Indigenous person. It is important for all of us who are not Indigenous to go, how can we do better? Because we haven't done good enough to this date and we need to do better. To those of you in the audience, I again pay my respects to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people and express my thanks to you all for everything you've done for this university and for this place over tens of thousands of years. Thank you.
So please thank Professor Pollock again for her words and for being here today to support us. It is my great pleasure and honour to introduce Professor Michelle Trudgett, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President Indigenous Leadership. Professor Trudgett is a Wiradjuri scholar, and her accolades and contributions to the university are endless, including to guiding me through a PhD. From being a recipient of the NAIDOC Scholar of the Year Award to the Neville Bonner Award for Teaching Excellence, in my eyes, Professor Trudgett's leadership has kept the fire burning and will continue to do that. So please join me in welcoming Professor Trudgett.
Good morning, everybody. Claire, thank you for your very kind remarks. I appreciate it. But I've got to say it's a team effort, and I'm blessed to have the best team here at Western. I acknowledge that today we are gathered on the beautiful, beautiful land of the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders and extend that respect to other Indigenous people here today. Thank you, Dr. Locke, for the beautiful welcome to country and your very kind introduction. And welcome everybody to the 26th annual Yarramundi Lecture. It is such a privilege to have you join us today. For over a quarter of a century now, the Yarramundi Lecture has provided a platform to voice matters of national and local importance. And I wish to personally thank Anipel Waimara for her leadership in establishing this really important lecture series. Unfortunately, Anipel couldn't be with us today, but she knows that we're thinking of her today. This year, we're guided by the NAIDOC theme, Keep the Fire Burning, Black, Loud and Proud. And we continue this tradition of speaking to such topics that impact Indigenous people. Black, Loud and Proud is more than a theme. It's a call for action to challenge each of us to amplify the voices of Indigenous people, to celebrate identity and to take up space unapologetically. A key part of taking up space that I'm personally very passionate about from both a research topic perspective and also from a lived experience lens is that space within the boardrooms. Here at Western, we have Indigenous people who rightfully occupy positions where space has been created for and with us, enabling us the opportunity to provide incredibly valued contributions to the university's core business. And I thank colleagues in this room today for your incredible contributions. However, one of the key frustrations that many of us share is when large corporate organisations claim to have a deep commitment to Indigenous people, which is often written into RAP plans or similar documents, but their boardrooms are devoid of Indigenous people. Many of these companies came out in strong support for the Voice campaign, some even throwing millions of dollars behind the campaign. Still, their boardrooms painted a different picture, with their leadership teams and boards not matching their institutional or organisational rhetoric. Here at Western, we have no appetite for insincere or hypocritical promises. We are here to make meaningful changes for Indigenous people now and for many generations to follow. And I must say, I honestly believe we have the best Indigenous staff and students of any university in Australia. Together, we form a strong Indigenous family, always looking for ways to support and care for one another, whilst also, at the same time, looking to build strong Indigenous professionals and leaders through careful career development and opportunities. But in order to make positive change for many generations to follow, we need to do so by incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing. And to be frank, sometimes this doesn't align with a business as usual approach. And that is okay, as it's important that we take the time to get it right and that we never back down from being ambitious in our aspirations and our goals. We are strong, determined people with incredible ancestors who have passed down knowledge for many, many generations. The Indigenous Centre of Excellence embodies this year's NAIDOC theme. It is the creation of a space that honours Indigenous knowledge, celebrates culture, and provides a platform for Indigenous voices to be heard. It represents a step in the commitment to Indigenous excellence and education. Indigenous knowledges are central to every single aspect of its design, function, and purpose. It is essential that when you commit to embedding Indigenous perspectives, and Claire just mentioned that in her speech, that you embed it across all aspects of university life. This started with our 2020 to 2025 Indigenous strategy, extended to our 2023 to 2032 Indigenous Futures strategy, and our recently launched Indigenous Research strategy. This commitment has found its way to the creation of an environment where Indigenous knowledges is valued, respected, and taking up space in much the same way we encourage one another to do so. As we welcome today's speakers, I encourage you to listen and to consider how you can continue to amplify Indigenous voices. How can we ensure that Black, Loud and Proud is not just a theme for 2024, but that it permeates indefinitely in our actions? To conclude, I would like to say a big heartfelt thanks to our esteemed speakers, to our fabulous MCs, and to my incredible team for their hard work behind the scenes in bringing today's event to life. Thank you all for being here today. I look very forward to the insightful presentations and discussions to follow, and importantly, happy NAIDOC week, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor Trudgett. Please show your appreciation. Your leadership is an inspiration, and the achievements we've seen at Western Sydney are certainly underpinned by your guidance and determination. It is now my pleasure to introduce my co-MC for today, Director of Indigenous Research at Western Sydney University, Professor Gwayne Bodkin-Andrews. Professor Bodkin Andrews will introduce our guest speakers and moderate our Q&A session. Please join us on the stage.
Tajari Guru, thank you, Michelle. It is always an honour to hear your voice and how you share the knowledges of country, these sacred and unceded lands. Brother Madago, Galamban, o Daragnura, Narawaloa, Dinga, Duguroa. Grado Danana, Gamada Guria, Dinga, Duguroa. Wadea, good morning, I think. It's a privilege to introduce the esteemed guest speakers of this year's Yarramundi Lecture. Our first speaker is Dr. Danièle Hromek. Dr. Hromek is a Badawang and Murrung, is a Badawang and Murrung. Is of the Badawang and Murrung clans of the Darug Nation and also the Buria people of the Darul Nation, and is a pioneer of country-centred design. Dr. Hromek has provided valuable guidance towards the Centre of Indigenous Excellence. Particularly, her research and practices have focused on the intersection of Indigenous knowledges and spatial design, reimagining how we can create built environments that respect, reflect, and centre Indigenous perspectives and knowledges. Following Dr. Hromek, we will hear the words of Sarah Lynn Rees, a Palawa woman of the Turolaway peoples with extensive knowledge in Indigenous built environments. Sarah has been pivotal in steering the design of the highly anticipated Indigenous Centre for Excellence. Her work bridges the gap between Indigenous knowledges and contemporary architecture, creating spaces that honour and celebrate Indigenous cultures. Through their work, innovation and advocacy for Indigenous voices in architecture and design, these speakers possess the essence of this year's NAIDOC theme: keep the fires burning, black, loud and proud. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Danièle Hromek.
Oh, I have jumped ahead. Warami, thank you, Michelle L., my beautiful sister, for the beautiful welcome and to always being a teacher to me since we sat across from each other in our PhDs. Thank you to Gawain for being my PhD supervisor and helping me through that horrendous journey at times, and also a wonderful journey. Please do it if you get a chance. Thank you to Michelle Trudgett also for creating the space that I could be safe there. And also thank you for welcoming us to this university, Claire. So I'm going to talk about how, in my opinion, we need to create spaces for First Nations voices to be black, loud and proud. First, let's learn the system. There we go. It's always important when we're on country, which is always, to acknowledge the people of country, the Barramadagal of the Darug Nation. They've cared for this place for more generations of people than we can know, more thousands of years than we can know, and they've carried the knowledge through to this place, to care for this place for more time than we can possibly understand. The elders are still very rich in their knowledge, they still share a lot and are very generous, and just to acknowledge that they themselves have been the ones who've kept this place black, loud and proud for so long. So I've worked it out now. So as I've mentioned, I want to talk about how we create spatial equity in order to create spaces where we can be black, loud and proud. Importantly for me, this is about how country can have voice, how community, culture and kin can all have those spaces to be black, loud and proud. So I'm a spatial designer. And everyone always asks me what's a spatial designer, so I've included a slide because that makes sense to tell you. It sits between the disciplines of architecture, which we're going to have Sarah come and talk to us about after this, interior design, urban design, public art, and a few other things. I'm also a researcher, as you may have gathered. I've completed a PhD, possibly the first PhD in spatial disciplines and possibly even in design, all of design. So not a small task, but we didn't know it at the time, actually, that that's what was happening. We just found that there was a void of voices. So it was a real honour to be able to bring together a collection of voices to talk about how we design our spaces as Aboriginal people and how we always have. So spatial designers use the design of these disciplines of architecture, interiors, etc., to convey, I guess, concepts and intentions across a variety of scales of spaces, from very small spaces, and they can be small interpretations, through to major spaces like new towns and suburbs. It's also about how human beings experience spaces, how we move through them, how we flow, how spaces themselves flow, and how we flow from interior to exterior and in reverse. Of course, as an Aboriginal person who also does spatial design, I'm also interested in how country has the opportunity to flow in all of these ways as well. I guess in my work, though, more often than not, it's about how do I create spaces where others can have voice. And mostly my work is advocacy these days. I don't get to sit down and design very often anymore. And these are just some of the sorts of projects that we've worked on over the years. But mostly I'm advocating for country, community, culture and kin to have space. And for country to be centred, and for our First Nations voices to sing in spaces. Of course, we're going to be talking a lot about the Indigenous Centre of Excellence, and even more over the next few years. And my practice, Ginjama, developed the Cultural Design Brief. That's the cover of it there. We did this for the competition team members, which Sarah was the winner. And the idea was that I've got a very wonderful team as well, Michelle. I've managed to not steal any of yours yet, though. And the team at Nur Advisory, who are equally wonderful. They're engagement experts, and we came together to develop this. And certainly Sarah will talk more about the Indigenous Centre of Excellence, but this was the grounding for those who were entering the competition to be able to hear the voices of community in a way that was fair in a competition sense, I guess. And it was an important document for us to make sure that Michelle's aspiration that this would be Indigenous-led could be met as well. And we've seen Indigenous-led all the way through this process for the Indigenous Centre of Excellence. And I think you saying this has to be Indigenous-led has given space for that to happen. And it was a very important thing that you said. Of course, this one here wasn't just authored by me. As I've said, it was by my wonderful team and Nur Advisory, but also all of those wonderful voices, the Darug voices who came into this, the Western Sydney University staff and students, and of course the immense Elders Advisory Committee, who we've got some here today, who we're very grateful for all those people to come in and give us their voices into this document. But what I want to talk to you about is spatial equity. So, of course, I'm not talking about equality here, I'm talking about equity, because equality doesn't recognise that we don't start from the same position. We start from different positions, all of us. Equity refers to inclusion, fairness and justice, and it makes balances for those of us who don't start from here, but start from here. The questions, I guess, around spatial equity is like, where are we starting from in terms of which filter are we looking at the world through? What worldviews and perspectives have spaces been designed? And who is teaching about how to design those spaces from a spatial perspective? And what worldview are they teaching that through? Of course, before 1788, we designed all of this. We being First Nations people or Indigenous people or however you want to identify, we designed it all. People sort of maybe disagree about the word design, but if you think about the design as being the process of envisioning and planning the creation of objects, systems, buildings, spaces, etc., then certainly our careful curation and consideration and processes of adaptation and cultural care and of course cultural practices, that was a design process. And it was a process of envisioning and planning country and the future of our communities on country. Since 1788, we know that this has all been changed. We didn't lose all of this. It was forcibly removed. Our access to our lands was forcibly removed. Our access to languages, to our ways of being on country, they were forcibly removed from us. It was systematically taken. At the heart of this process was the acquisition of our lands and the resources that come with our lands. It was definitely the rationale for the behaviour that the colonists made. They named the place Australia, they discovered it, claimed it for themselves, and then they put their values on top of it and their beliefs on top of it. And they assumed that the ones that were already there didn't exist anymore. They put on legal structures, political, economic, social structures that institutionalised and perpetuated these ways of being as well. And they made it seem like their way was superior and normal. But it was actually the only way that their invasive society could continue to thrive. It meant that they had to, in effect, erase the ways of being that was already here. So I'm going to do a little provocative quiz to get you all moving and thinking. There's a disclaimer here, which if you've got good eyes, you can read it. It says, the research on the following pages is unacademic and quite honestly a little shitty. I do not recommend you reference it. I preface this by also saying all of country always was and always will be Aboriginal land. However, if we're unable to access our lands and our places, and we didn't design it, then it has been a colonised experience of that. So I just want you to preface that before anyone goes, always was, always will be. Agree. However, how are we designing it? So this is a quiz for you guys to let you think about it. And also, sorry, Gawain, for my terrible unacademic research in this project. You maybe close your eyes for a little while. Okay, I want you to shout out to me. How many churches do you think there are in Sydney? Not including mosques, synagogues, temples, or other places of worship, just churches. Too many is the word I got. Anyone else? A number? 500? How many schools do we have? Not higher education or university, just schools. How many schools? How many? Hundreds? Thousands? How many hospitals do you think we have in Sydney? 2,000? Any other guesses? There are more than 220 in all of New South Wales, though. Okay, parks. Just in Parramatta, let's do parks. In the Parramatta LGA. 500? 5. I was going for the max there. Any other guesses? 5? 20? This is managed parks and reserves, and it totals 212 hectares, and there's also a further 143 hectares of sports grounds. How many stadiums across Sydney? 7? 100? Somebody knows their stadiums here. What about shopping centres? This is over 75,000 square metres shopping centres. just the big ones. 100, did we have? 500? 20. How many Indigenous spaces do we have? And I'm going to define an Indigenous space for you as a space where Indigenous peoples can go to just be Indigenous for free. Michelle knows one. 10? I actually don't know. I couldn't find them. However, we've got one coming, right, Michelle? At least. The reason that I did this was just to show you that clearly there's a lot of spaces for all of the other things that people and other majorities can do in Sydney, New South Wales area, Parramatta area. But when it comes to Indigenous spaces, we are severely lacking. And I would say that actually we're in spatial inequity. Now I'm going to show you that I could do proper research now. So the formations of towns and cities is a key part of the colonial process. They're formed through the exercise of power and political control by some groups over another. So this is all started actually before white people even came to this continent. Lord Shaftesbury was given a title to a huge tract of land in North America that became Carolina. And he referred to the grand model of colonial town planning. And this was a policy of deliberate urbanisation in preference to dispersed settlement. This planning model preserved the European objective of enlightenment and superiority over what they saw as an Indigenous lack of rationale. This led, of course, to Indigenous people's invisibility, exclusion and enclosure. So by the time they arrived here, they were kind of experts at it, right? They got very, very good at colonising by the time they got here. Towns became non-Indigenous spaces because Indigenous people needed to be removed from the public gaze. In constructing those environments, they formed a series of, and we all know this as mob, of fringe dwellers, people who live around the outside, pushed out of public spaces. And this, occasionally we get some dirt handed back, and we all know the famous vision of the dirt being handed back into, you know, the one I'm talking about, the photo. I'm sorry, I can't remember the names of everybody who was involved in that other than... Right. Vincent Lingari, thank you, Michelle. This is why I have my very good sister here. In actuality, I've been told there's 5 minutes, how rude. In actuality, there needs to be a complete redrawing of the ground. So, in terms of spatial inequality, in terms of buildings, they are colonised spaces as well, because they've been designed with the colonial way of designing, rather than our light-footed ways of laying out our ground, of designing country. It has forced us as Indigenous people to move in particular ways through spaces. It has forced our bodies to not be able to touch the ground as we normally would. It has forced our psyche and our ways of experiencing spaces and knowing our spaces to not be our lived reality any longer. Even parks are designed spaces, and they are colonial spaces. Whenever you design a park, and Sarah and other designers in the space will know that they move the landform as much as architects do. They don't necessarily respect the form of the land or the ground. You might be able to touch grass, but it's usually invasive grass that's been, that's what exotic, as other people call it. It doesn't belong here, it doesn't come from here. And it neglects our ways of understanding our external spaces, our ways of signposting and monumentalising our land. So our ways have been disregarded through all of the ways of designing, through urban architecture and parks and landscape. Our Indigenous treatments on the ground were very light-footed. They still are. They're often, now, people will say, well, we didn't see it when we arrived. We didn't see that there was people there, and we know that that's the excuse that they've used. But we know that our people have been here, and that we know that they've created homes and places on country for all this time. In comparison to the Western way of doing things, which is a heavy-footed way of doing things on the ground, dislodging materials and parts of country from somewhere else and putting it in another part of country on someone else's land. I find it an incredibly selfish way of behaving, actually, on country. So in my work, and this is possibly a bit controversial to say this given the theme, but I feel that I'm successful if I manage to be quiet and elevate others' voices. If I'm managing for country, culture, community and kin, to have their voices elevated and to be proud, black and loud on country. Indigenous peoples are, of course, on country, wherever we are now, we're inherently politicised, as are our absences and presences on country. What we do is all political. Margaret Kovacs has noted this. She's an excellent, worth looking into, and she talks about how we are political as just by being Indigenous. By walking into a space, we make the space political. And by extension, of course, Indigenous researchers, architects, designers, they make research, architecture, design political simply by being who we are in spaces. And as designers, I think Sarah and I know that to be true. This inequity that we're noticing has been noticed by others, and I've just put a few quotes up there for you to see. I guess it's not just left to the urban context, but we mostly see it in the urban context, where spaces that are special to Indigenous people are unreadable by non-Indigenous people. And what they actually see in us is a culture of poverty, welfare dependence. We're being, if we act in a way that's not considered to be Aboriginal enough because we're not living in the desert or we're not living in a cultural way that they think is cultural, then therefore we are no culture and therefore we're not Aboriginal. And so these Western systems mean that our ways of being have been designed out of cities. Does that make sense? Literally, for Aboriginal people, we are both invisible and we're hypervisible. We both don't want to necessarily have to be political, but we are in spaces. We have to make this commentary because it's not equal at the moment. So, Eileen Morton Robinson, another amazing scholar, describes cities as signifying with every building and every street that this land is now possessed by others. Signs of white possession are embedded everywhere in the landscape. Cities have become evidence of ownership of Indigenous lands by non-Indigenous people. And the collective memory of Australians became whitened as a result of that and forgot that we needed our spaces too. That we deserve them, even at 33% of the population, we don't have 3% of the space. It puts on us some enduring impacts, I guess, that means that we don't necessarily have the best starting points all the time. We usually start from down here and have to build up to get to equality, to get to equity. However, I just want to say this as an Aboriginal person who lives in a city, I still feel country here, and I still feel it's very important here, regardless of where I am, that country's here and that it can sing and it can be rich. So I wanted to say that the invitation from Indigenous peoples is actually incredibly inclusive, which is converse, I think, to what the invitation that we often receive. Just a couple of people whose voices sing to me. Auntie Julie Freeman, she said that we lived here in Eden, but things altered dramatically. These buildings might look like wonderful historical things, but they almost destroyed us. The clearing of the land, the taking of the species, the eating of everything that was balanced so well, that whole thing altered our landscape. And of course, our own wonderful Uncle Greg Sims and Auntie Jacinta Tobin from this country. Auntie Jacinta, she has a principle that she talks about that she calls yes and yes. And she says that all who come onto country in the right way, I think that's the key phrase, has belonging on country. And Uncle Greg has said to me, we, Indigenous people, have been waiting a very long time for you, non-Indigenous people, to join our circle. That's about all I've got to say, except I promised Sarah I was going to talk about the Deadly Jurumin yarns, because it's a little project and it's not small anymore that we started. And I guess it's a way that we have taken about to elevate others' voices as women in built environments, which is both severely dominated by male white stale perspectives, but also actively sometimes seeks to silence Indigenous and women's voices. So I don't have a particular slide about it. She just said, are you going to talk about it? And I thought, I think I will, because it's worth looking it up. It's called Deadly Jurumin. Jurumin means sister in Michelle's language. And it actually came from us feeling excluded and realising that it wasn't just one person's experience, but it was a united experience of exclusion. And it is, in effect, it's a talk series now. We've done 26 of those now, haven't we? And they cover all different types of topics across the built environment and other things as well. So in that note, I'm going to let Sarah take over. Shall I leave this up here? Thank you.
Thank you, Danièle. Your work, your advocacy, your ability to give voice to country, culture, communities and kin is something that we should all strive for. And maybe, just maybe, through work like yours and warriors like yourself, that question mark of Indigenous place will be replaced with everywhere. Thank you. I shall now introduce the proud Palawa warrior, Sarah Lynn Rees. Please come to the stage.
All right, my talk is going to be even less research academic. Apologies in advance. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank everyone for the invitation to being here, Michelle, Gawain, and the Western Sydney community. We've had the pleasure of working on the Indigenous Centre of Excellence for, almost a year now in terms of when we started the competition process, and it is one of my favourite projects ever, possibly my favourite one, but don't tell my other clients. I'd like to start also by acknowledging that we're on Darug country, and as built environment practitioners, we take great responsibility in seeking to understand what our responsibility is to country, and this is going to be the focus of my my conversation today in terms of black, loud and proud. Similar to Danièle, I don't see it as being about myself. It is very much about the reality that architecture's job is to reshape country, and historically architecture has been a tool for colonisation and destruction, still is, and that we have a lot of work to do to actively rework all of those systems and policies and processes and politics in order to create better futures that cause less harm to country, culture and community. This is my ancestor, he's Manalagena. So I come from the Trawlaway people of northeast Tasmania, and Manalagena was the chief of the community up there, and he comes from a long line of heads of the community, and also I have a strong line of genuinely incredible history of Aboriginal female leadership from Tasmania. So I'm proud to walk in their footsteps, albeit I don't walk on my own country. I grew up in Tasmania, but I live and work on Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung country, so I also pay my respects to those elders who have taken me into their community on that country. So I come from Tasmania, down the bottom, and I put this graphic up. Oh, I should have started my timer, sorry. I put this graphic up because to me, and I think to all of us, it's probably one of the most recognisable ways of understanding the continent now referred to as Australia. However, the reality is that this is how the rest of the world and the rest of our non-Indigenous communities, and specifically during the time of colonisation up until now, that our country has been re-evaluated, reviewed, rewritten, redrawn. And this extends from the macro down to the micro. You can look at early pictures of the settlement. This is of Melbourne, or the colonisation of Melbourne, where the geography, topography, natural systems, the ways of being, the ecologies, the movement of animals and insects and people have been completely eroded by the placing of a grid. And that grid, if we look back to versions of or drawings of country through paintings, albeit from a non-Indigenous lens, or from recreations of those maps from Indigenous communities, there is a very significant difference in terms of how we view this to how we view it now, with the city skylines, buildings full of glass and steel, and a grid overlaying the land that historically once was abundant with forests and animals and insects and possums. If we zoom in even further, well, I should say this cadastral mapping in this application, the dissection of land, has absolved humans of the responsibility to look outside of the boundary line that you see on our drawings when we're working to create new futures or new architectures in a space, and that is inherently problematic because country is always connected and never defined by a red line. If we go even further, this is another map of Melbourne. On the left-hand side, this is the ecological vegetation classes from pre-1750 done through soil testing. On the right-hand side is what's still left. We are, and Danièle and I work in industries that are inherently destructive, as I said before. And my elders in Melbourne, particularly Ngawi Carolyn Briggs, speaks to the idea of our responsibility to country being to not harm the waterways, not harm the children, not harm the land. So we've harmed the children, we've harmed the land, and we also harm our waterways. And the reality of our industry extends both as a tool for colonisation. So these are examples of houses that were built in a remote community. I say houses, which are literal tools for assimilation of Indigenous ways of life into Western practices or nuclear family homes. And these are still getting built. So Danièle, myself, and a number of people, Indigenous people working within our industry, are trying to shift and rewrite this and challenge the systems that we work within. So I think we can all say quite strongly that we value the values of our communities and country a little bit more strongly in terms of the context of our history than we do the Western ways of being, the Western ways being this little white line, and the black line being the equivalent of 60,000 years, or as one of my elders say to me, as long as science can prove. And then this is probably my cheeky little take. The problem that we face is that we have a set of Australian values. I don't know if you've ever looked up Australia's values, but this is what the government defines as our values. If you look through it, it's very people-centred, and it's very Western people-centred. Now, I've done this with absolutely no authority, and I've done it on behalf of myself, but I've done a cheeky little markup on Australia's values to consider or ask the question of what would happen if country was at the centre of these values, and what that might mean for the way that we think about ourselves collectively as a society, our individual self and our own value and our connection to the countries that we're on and the communities that are within those countries, but possibly more importantly, our responsibility outside of human. Our responsibility to land, sea, water, sky, insects, animals, natural systems, all of those things. So I have no authority to do this, but I did it anyway. So this brings me to what we are trying to do. And we've by no means solved the problem. I think it's going to take generations and generations of Indigenous people in architecture, of which there are very few, a handful. And we are trying to actively come up with systems to combat this way of thinking. And so Danièle and I, we both do a lot of advocacy. As Danièle mentioned, it becomes a core part of our job. Yes, politics, yes, advocacy, yes, design, yes, everything else, yes, educator. Whichever space we walk into, we are all of those things, and we do not have a choice. So this is a diagram I like to use to explain, particularly to my non-Indigenous clients, that every project that we work on is on country or within country. I think there's an important distinction there, because on to me implies land, within actually encompasses a broader understanding for me of what country is. And that every project has the opportunity to destroy, maintain, repair, or celebrate country, culture, and community. And depending on what has already happened to that country depends on where we start. And more often than not, our industry is in the practice of flattening land, removing ecology, flattening topography to make best use of land for architectures and roads and all sorts of systems. The other context we work in is that more often than not we're at this end of the scale, where we have non-Indigenous clients, non-Indigenous stakeholders, non-Indigenous end users. And I have the great joy of being able to work now predominantly on projects with Indigenous clients, Indigenous stakeholders, Indigenous end users. And I do make the point that traditional owners are not stakeholders. So there is elements that are missing within this diagram, one of which is that country should be a part of all of those conversations, whether or not you have Indigenous leadership from a client. We have a responsibility whether or not we can engage, and we need to actively change the systems that we work within so that every project has a responsibility to not destroy country. That doesn't mean every project represents country, but no project should destroy country. A little methodology in terms of how we also like to think about this, and there's almost not yet been a project where this has happened, where a project starts with the values, rights and laws of country. It determines and defines what our responsibility to country is in a place, and that is married with the project purpose. And then from there you determine a series of values, objectives and outcomes with the intention that if we can pair 5 minutes remaining, my God. Okay, I'm going to just keep going. If we can actually do this, then there are a series of ways that architecture can have an impact and built environments can have an impact beyond art and language, which is all that's often afforded to traditional owners at this point in time. We also have an opportunity to explore the transfer of wealth to Indigenous communities and peoples through the way that we specify our architectures and buildings. Problem is that what we are taught at architecture school is that the blunt tool of architecture aligns with siting, aspect and light, spatial relationships, form and materiality and specification, and that impacts a number of different aspects which are shown on the right-hand side, but all of those can typically be engineered out, quite literally. We can underground waterways and we can do whatever we like to land in order to deliver the vision. So I will scream through this. A number of Indigenous people working in architecture sit on the Australian Institute of Architects First Nations Advisory Committee, and we have been working with the Architects Accreditation Council of Australia to update the National Standards of Competency for Architecture. A lot of information. But the fundamental point is that we are trying to systemically change our industry so that every project has a responsibility to country. So this includes embedding that practice of architecture. Embedded within the practice of architecture is the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' ongoing connection and custodianship for country. And this now means that every architecture school in Australia has to teach these performance criteria, which should fundamentally change the way that architecture and future architects operate and act within country. And this goes beyond the tangible elements. This also speaks to engagement, it speaks to caring for country, it speaks to responsibility, it talks to intellectual property. For us, I've got a couple of little project snippets, and so I'll quickly talk to those, and they range in scale from exhibition through to the Indigenous Centre of Excellence. And the first is looking at the Nagi Jambana, which means gathering place in Bunurong, and it was a collaboration between myself and Nawi Carolyn Briggs, who's one of my elders in Melbourne. We wanted to ask the question and challenge the notion of neighbourhood character, which is also something that we're taught to design to in architecture school, but unfortunately neighbourhood character means that you just reference watered down versions of colonial architecture, so we wanted to change the starting place. So we asked ourselves the question, if our public spaces or our buildings were made from the materials of country, the identity of country, the story of country, what would those, in this case, materials be? Materials being one of those blunt tools. So we undertook a design-led research exhibition, and we came up with a series of materials and challenged the notion of an exhibition itself, inviting people to connect with those materials, touch those materials, sit on those materials. But this does leave open a wide gaping question of what right do we even have to have those materials? How have they been extracted? Has that been done in alignment with the protocols of elders and community? and I guess another research exhibition to come in the future at some point to try and address those issues at a broader scale. Another project I'll quickly touch on is Atlantic Fellows for Social Equity. So this is an Indigenous-led social change fellowship hub at the University of Melbourne that we had the pleasure of working on. And this is where we start to see our methodology of understanding the values, rights and laws of a place come into play. The challenge with this project included that we were engaging with 3 traditional owner groups, and there was likely to be a determination of who was the registered Aboriginal party during that time. So the challenge to us set by the traditional owners was how can we embed and reflect country in a project without drawing on language, without drawing on art, without drawing on markings or symbols that are specific to one of those communities. So we undertook, it's an interior fit-out project, this was the existing conditions, quite dull, let's say. And so we undertook a lot of research into the tangible aspects of the country that we're on and how those tangible aspects were connected through cultural practice. And one of the important values for this project was to challenge the ongoing socio-economic and political status quo that sustains inequity. So a key focus for us on this project was to understand how we could transfer wealth to Indigenous communities through the specification of our materials. We did our research. We understand that the site was situated along a waterway that has since been undergrounded, which eels still move through, that the ecology of the site was a woodland, and that there were these areas of outcrops. And within that outcrop, the other briefing line to us was, because a number of Indigenous people come to this fellowship program every year from all across Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific, how can we have people who are coming here feel like they're connected to the country that they're on, but also connect back to the countries that they've come from? And so in collaboration with the elders, we designed a message stick circle, suspended message sticks, I'll say a contemporary interpretation of message sticks. And the reason I want to talk to you about this is because of the values that went into the creation of it. So our design looked at, if you put a map down on the ground, when people were inducted into the program and they went through the cultural processes of induction, that they would then be able to place a woven sleeve on a message stick that was in the direction of where they'd come from. So forever when that ceremony became becoming a part of the community. Technically, 360 message sticks, one for every degree of the circle, to be able to lay out and point into a map, each of them slightly off-centred. And I say contemporary interpretation because they're quite long. But we worked with agency projects to work with a Indigenous timber milling company up on Dja Dja Wurrung country to select a tree that had blown down in a storm that the traditional owners needed to have removed so that they could care for country. And those message sticks were crafted of this tree. The tree was removed in a way that didn't harm country. The message sticks were then sent out to communities all across Australia to be marked up and then sent back to this place where this project is located. I could go on for ages about this, but I'm going to get to Western Sydney Uni now. But just to quickly note, I could talk about this project for hours because there are so many layers and details that go into this project, including everything from kangaroo leather instead of cow leather to seeds in the paint within a space to the articulation of the timbers that were used and how we laid them out across a wall so that they were reflected the feeling of being inside of a woodland, even though you're 5 stories up in an existing building. All right, Western Sydney Uni, Indigenous Centre of Excellence, and I will get through this in a minute. That might be a lie. So we had the great honour of being one of the teams that were shortlisted to participate in the design competition last year, and had the great joy of working with Jinjama, so Danielle's cultural brief. It was one of the first times in any competition we've ever had that. And as we know, also one of the systems we're trying to change is that competition processes fundamentally remove the designers from the community in the name of probity. And that is a very challenging process to go through and actually quite culturally risky for any Indigenous person working on a design team to then seek to interpret country or story in a way that you don't know if you have permission to do, and then you then have to create an architecture around it, and there's no opportunity to actually have that engagement through the process. So to be able to start the process with the cultural brief was a fundamental shift in the way that competitions could run, so thank you for that. So our response much like, so Auntie Caroline, who I mentioned before, who's one of my elders, she talks about a welcome on her country and uses the word Womanjika, but Womanjika means come, but also what is your purpose for coming? So it's a welcome and a challenge at the same time. And the way that I have learnt to practice architecture in this context is to state your intentions for why you are here and what you are doing and how you intend to operate. So our response to the competition was framed around a series of intentions. The first was to reconnect to the energies and flows and practices of country, and seeking to connect the Melaleuca tree back to the water ecology, back to Vineyard Creek, back to Parramatta, back to the natural systems, for that water then to nourish the soils, to be able to grow the ecologies that should live there, and have a building that wraps around that doesn't impose on these ecologies and allows them all to flourish, so that both human and non-human kin can operate and exist within a space together rather than just coexist. Our second intention was for country to have authorship in the design. So I think Danièle mentioned this, a lot of work that we try to do is to seek to give country a voice through what we're doing, and through that process give community a voice in the architectures that we create. And this is largely because we don't want to impose an identity on a place, much like all of those neighbourhood character colonial architecture processes tell us to do. So for this, we came to this position as mangroves as composer by walking country and spending a lot of time walking around the campus and the fringes of the campus and falling in love, to use Danielle's phrasing, with a part of country which was the mangroves at the confluence of Parramatta Creek and Vineyard Creek, Parramatta River, sorry. And we spent a significant amount of time there, and every time we came back to country, we revisited that place. And the architecture itself emulates this both in the structure, in the form, in the volume, in the way that light interacts as it moves into the space. But I also invite you to look at how you can actually read the mangroves in understanding where you might be able to move through them, because they grow over these waterways in this sort of angled way. Great description, Sarah. Our third intention was to improve the health and wellbeing of country. So this ties in with the first, but is seeking to fundamentally return ecologies to this site that have been removed in order to create habitat for non-human species that have also had their home removed and paved over, and in order for them to be able to flourish, to give them the resources that they need so that they in turn can start caring for country, because it's not just humans who care for country, it is our non-human kin who care for country too. And without them, we can't do it alone. So we need to make sure that we can invite them back in a way that is healthy for them. I'll skip through to the architecture because now I'm definitely over time. So this was our proposal. So this is standing on 5th Street, looking north. And the architecture is growing out of the ground as if the roots of the mangroves are growing out either side of the creek. And there is a veil, a woven-like veil, that is placed over the building that is made from brick shingles, which we're seeking to use local clay. And the two ends of the building open up, much like the mangroves do, to show you where the pathway through is, in order to show you where the entry is into the two civic spaces at the end of the building. So on the left-hand side, we have the open amphitheatre, and on the right-hand side, we have the theatre. There is a lot of program in this building. So we have the outdoor amphitheatre, community spaces, care, discovery, exhibition, cinema, theatre, teaching and learning spaces, library, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Leadership Office, the Indigenous Research Institute, Badinami, and a multi-purpose sports court, as well as an astronomy garden. I will flick through these because I'm definitely over time, but I hope you can see through this process that we've sought to understand how country is celebrated, how country is danced, how country is sung, and the atmosphere of country that is created in the natural environment can be emulated through an architecture. So the first was the open amphitheatre. This is the arrival and community space with a cafe and spaces for mob to come and gather for free without having to pay to be in a space, which is always a problem, as Danièle mentioned. We have the landscape that exists within the building. So everywhere you walk in this building, on one side you have program, on one side you have landscape. You're never disconnected from or disoriented from the landscape, and the ecologies and descendant trees that will come from the Melaleuca that exists on site. This is our walkway around the building. Again, landscape on one side, exhibition on the other. the exhibition spaces themselves connected to landscape. So everywhere you are, you're always connected to the landscape. We have the theatre. Inside the theatre, through this process that we're in now, we're also seeking to understand what materials that we can bring into this project, whether they be local timbers or salvage stones, and there's a whole process that we're going through in terms of the interior identity and character that is drawn from country rather than neighbourhood. We have my favourite picture, which is looking through the nose of the theatre and into the amphitheatre beyond, and the wetland that connects the overflow of water from the runoff from the building and cleanses it before returning it back into the creek and the creek's environment. The multi-purpose sports court on the roof, and the building in its setting, and then nighttime, and that's it. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. You reminded me of another Palawa scholar by the name of Maggie Water, who spoke the other day to me. She said, "We do not decolonise, we indigenise. You're not making spaces comfortable for all peoples, but you're returning place to country." Thank you for your work. I'm now going to introduce the proud and strong Andrew Webster, a Wiradjuri man who will speak to us today as a student of WSU who is currently studying paramedicine, or a Bachelor of Paramedicine, which makes me quite intimidated already, something I wish I was smart enough to do. Andrew, thank you and welcome.
Hello everyone. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge the land we're on. The land that was taken care about by the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation. I want to extend my respect to elders both past and present, and to all the Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders here today. First of all, I want to thank Danièle and Sarah. You guys have given me a new perspective everywhere I walk, whether it's on country, in a bush, in a room. You've truly inspired me to think more about where I am and the history of everything, more so than I already have. So thank you. I don't have as much of an academic background as the previous speakers, but I will speak about what this NAIDOC theme means to me, which is keep the fire burning, black, loud and proud. And to me, three things come to mind, and they're all connected. They're confidence, knowledge and community. And both confidence and knowledge, to me, comes from community, and it's something that I've embraced here at Western Sydney from the moment I entered the university through the Pathways Streaming initiative to the moment I walked into a Bad Army Centre, learned about all the things I could do. And anyone who knows me here today, I pretty much say yes to any opportunity that comes my way, including this one today. And I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity and all the opportunities I've had through the university. I've had the privilege to go to Taiwan to share our knowledge as Indigenous people from our perspective and learn about their Indigenous perspective in their native country. I've also been proud to be part of 2 Indigenous Nationals teams, which is, as you can see, I'm wearing our polo for that reason, and I have my teammates here today supporting me, so I thank you guys. And they're kind of the forefront of my meaning of this NAIDOC celebration, because I don't think I've ever been more black, and everyone who knows the Indigenous teams, we've never been more loud, and we're so proud when we're together in community. Even to those who went to Taiwan with us know we were very loud in Taiwan, or whether it's in Melbourne or Wollongong like the past 2 hosts of Nationals were. But that to me is how we keep the fire burning, by embracing our community, by being with each other, by sharing knowledge and learning from each other. And to be honest, I'm so proud. I was part of one of the students that was part of the cultural brief for the Centre of Indigenous Excellence. And even though I was a drop of water in this vast project this vast river of a project, the fact that most of the other drops of water in that are Indigenous, I had such little contribution, but I will scream to the heavens and anyone who will listen that I was a part of it. And I'll keep this short because I know we're pretty much very over time. So I'll say this, that I'm happy to talk to every single person here and embrace exactly what I've said. Embrace community, talk to people, learn from each other. So if we want to have a bit more of a yarn, I'm open to that. I had more to say, but like I said, I'll say it later on. But I will say this, even though I will be graduated by the time the Centre of Indigenous Excellence will open, I hope it's a place that elders can come, so a mob can come, we can talk, we can learn from each other, informally and formally. And I'll say I will be there once I've graduated. I am proud, and we will keep the fire burning. Thank you.
So I just want to thank everybody again for being here, for joining us, for taking on board all these amazing ideas and listening to these deadly people. There's plenty of conversation to be had, and I invite you all out to the auditorium for some refreshments where this can continue, and you can be part of the conversation as well. So thank you to our special guests, thank you to my excellent MC, and to Professor Trudgett, to everybody being here. I hope that you take something away, even just one little shining bit of light, that you are black, proud and loud. So thank you very much.